and move on to our first big topic this week on Pro Soccer Talk. And it's something that we've had a week or so to digest now. We're going to think about, maybe let some of the emotion go, but I know it's a very emotional topic. The US men's national team, U23s, failing to qualify for the Olympic Games in Tokyo. What does it mean? How big of an impact is it going to have on the US men's national team going forward? Because that's now 3 straight Olympic Games the men's team have not qualified for. They missed the World Cup qualification process in that run as well. How big of a blow is this, Nick Mendola?
So it's a big blow in the sense of how it's going to be perceived and felt maybe throughout the entirety of the player pool, and maybe U.S. soccer as attitude-wise. Is it a big blow to miss the Olympics? Only kind of, sort of. This is, if this would have been the best U23 team they could have pulled, even from MLS, forget the European guys who couldn't be there, then it would be a big blow. But, you know, I think it kind of, and we'll get into this, it smacks a little bit of that the arrogance hasn't subsided. It was, in my opinion, too young of a team and relied a little bit too much on hey, we're good enough and we're just going to do it, which is what happened to them in Trinidad at the senior level against Trinidad's B team. Again, let's always revisit this. Trinidad's B team that was already eliminated. So, you know, I mean, that arrogance, you would have thought the lesson was learned. And I guess that's the scary thing, right? Was the lesson learned?
We all have very different opinions, I think, on this in terms of how important it was to qualify for the Olympics. Andy, I know you differ slightly on this, but is it a macro or micro problem in terms of US soccer and where we're heading with the program overall?
Yeah, you're asking a lot of existential questions, a lot of really deep questions that make me want to like ponder existence and things like that. I'm with Nick. It's not the biggest deal in the world to miss out on the Olympics. I think missing out 3 times in a row is a pretty big deal because it would seem to indicate that not a lot has changed at that age level. And just in terms of what we're talking about here is the depth of the player pool, the young depth of the player pool more specifically. And if you look at what the senior team has in its squad most recently during the international window, all of the players that you would have liked to have been on the Olympic qualifying team. The only problem with that would have been most of them wouldn't have been released by their clubs to go join that tournament because it started before the international break. And so it comes at an awkward time. And so you can say, well, that's an excuse. It is a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's a group of professional players up and down that squad, the U23 team, most of them playing in MLS, most of them performing pretty well week to week in MLS. I think what it comes down to ultimately, and we had a conversation about this yesterday, is it's a mentality thing. It's adversity hitting these players really probably for the first time in their professional on-field lives in a way that they'd not experienced before. And when that happened, and when it happened in 2015 and when it happened in 2012, they didn't know how to respond. They didn't fold this time. I will give them credit for that. They did not fold the way that they did in 2012 and 2015, but they still weren't good enough.
So why did it happen then? Because we have to say as well, Nick mentioned it, the US could not call up all of their best players who are age eligible for this. So, you know, Mexico and Honduras, a lot of those countries did well, and fair play to them. And you can have the average age debate in terms of, you know, should this tournament have been held during a FIFA window instead of most of it in a non-FIFA window? Would that have helped and been a bit of a leveler? But anyway, why did this happen, Andy? I know you watched a lot of the games very closely. Was the quality not there? Was it a talent, or was it just the mentality thing, as you mentioned?
Yeah, the quality wasn't there that it needed to be at that level. It's the quality in the player pool is at the very top right now. And so we have done a good job in terms of, I guess, catching up with some of the rest of the world in developing and kind of molding some pretty elite talent. I mean, look at the names in the senior team. They could have been there, but we've still got a lot of work to do in the depths of the player pool down. You know, players 30 through 50 in the pool are not where they need to be to qualify for a tournament like this. And should a situation arise where somebody has to be called into the senior team for an important game in the future, that's when it becomes a real issue to me. Missing the Olympics, it's unfortunate. It would have been a really, really enjoyable experience for the players, for us, for everyone. But when they have to come into the national team and do a job and step in and they're unable to do it, that's when I think if that happens, I guess, that's when the real impact of this will be felt. To have not had that experience, to have had that failure, maybe they learn from it, maybe they grow from it. But I just look at that roster and I say, I don't see anyone, maybe one player who could make that jump up to the senior team one day and actually have a spot. And so it's just a thing that happened, in my opinion. It happened separately, I guess, from the rest of the player pool.
Nick, does this kind of bring up the argument about player development, MLS versus Europe, in terms of these players a similar age to a lot of the young Americans who have been in Europe now for many years? And does the US need to send all of its best young players to Europe as soon as possible? Because it seems like there's a very different level of play, even though these players are at the same kind of age, right? If we're looking at Pulisic and some of the guys who were on this Olympic qualifying team that did not qualify, there's a big difference.
Well, as I like to do, allow me to hedge and even change my opinion from the pre-meeting. Yes, first of all, I think mentality-wise is the question. I think we're developing very good, talented, technical, astute, even wise in the game players. The desperation thing is where it's getting me. And Honduras had a bunch of 22, 23, some 21-year-old players who were all playing in their senior league. And I actually want to drag, as this is a weird thing to do, and Andy can roast me because he's in more central MLS market for this. I want to drag what we've seen in the CONCACAF Champions League into this discussion, which is we see MLS teams lose to either lesser teams or just get dragged by Mexican teams. And so for me, what our academies need to do a better job of is exactly what Andy said. We need to force that desperation into them. And without getting into too macro of a pay-to-play discussion, at what age are they encountering real adversity where when they fail, they may have their place in jeopardy, and not just for a couple of weeks because, they paid $4,000 tuition to be on this team. So that's my big thing. Can you manufacture that competition and that day-to-day mentality that we see, let's be honest, a bit more prevalent in Mexico, in Europe, in South America?
When a young American player, sorry, Joe, when a young American player gets signed to a club in Europe, where are they in terms of the overall squad of players, in terms of every single player at the squad, whether it's first team, whether it's U23 team, whether it's a B team, whether it's a U19 team? Where are they? Who are they in the mix of that core group of players? They're just a player. They're just a person who is there to fight and to begin earning a spot. When a player at the same age is signed or drafted or traded for whatever in MLS, what are they in? What is their squad status in terms of the players at that club? They are immediately into consideration for a starting spot. They are immediately into the 18-man squad for match days, because at that level, with the squad sizes and the lack of constant movement of players because of the rules in MLS, the squad number is the squad number. And so the players that you have to use. There is no, signing someone and then just they don't make it and so they don't get an opportunity. Everybody plays in MLS for the most part, and that's just not how it is over in Europe. It is much more cutthroat. It's much more difficult, and you have to earn that opportunity. In MLS, it almost still, it is still given to players who haven't really technically earned it at that point of their careers.
Talking about the long-term aspects of this thing, because we've talked about the adversity and how players maybe haven't developed long-term. Tournament experience and a lack of that's got to be key, because that's something you just can't give up. We heard Christian Pulisic and Yunus Musa saying during the qualifying tournament for the Olympics that, sure, we'd love to play if the US qualified. If our clubs released us, we'd love to represent Team USA in Tokyo and try and win a gold medal. So that aspect of, in a few years' time, hopefully the US qualify for 2022, and then obviously we know 2026 is coming up. That's going to have a problem, right, Nick, in terms of the tournament experience and lack of it for these young players, even if they weren't involved in this qualifying debacle. Let's call it what it was.
Yeah, and it should be a pathway, right? You see Gio Reyna down at the U17 World Cup on a team with a bunch of NYCFC guys who are very impressive, and Joe Scally ends up going to Gladbach, and we're discussing what happens with some of the other guys on that team. What I think about is this weekend, Brendan Aronson had a brilliant cross for Salzburg that Pat Sindaka scored. How many teams now have heard of Brendan Aronson because they've been monitoring Pat Sindaka? And so when we look to the Olympics and U.S. is playing Germany or France, France's team is going to be incredible. Would that have been where Reggie Cannon or Miles Robinson or Jackson Ewell or Georgi Mihailovic get spotted by someone who then gives them a chance? So almost as much as the tournament experience, the stage, the missed stage is what's kind of ringing through my head.
Yeah, me too. For me, it feels like a huge missed opportunity for US soccer overall. For the men's team, we know the women's team are going to dominate as always, but for the men's team, the extra fans watching those young players, getting excited, have some hype, some momentum around them when it comes to World Cup qualifying and future tournaments, that feels like a big missed opportunity, because there will be fans who tune into the Olympics who do not watch Christian Pulisic and other players week in, week out, and they'll learn about their stories and they'll be more connected to the US men's team overall. And Andy, we're going to chuck it to you on one final thought here. The CONCACAF region as a whole. I mean, Canada, Honduras, Jamaica, got a lot of new players, young players, newly eligible players kind of rising and coming through the ranks. Ahead of World Cup qualifying in the summer, are the USA still the second best team in CONCACAF? Because Mexico are clearly head and shoulders above the rest. But is there a conversation and a bit of concern really for the US's status as the best of the rest, and a concern about qualifying for the next World Cup? Let's be honest.
I think it's probably important to remember, this is, I guess we're kind of moving into a senior team versus U23 team and depth of players conversation here. And so in terms of the senior team, and we're talking about qualifying for the World Cup and the Gold Cup coming up this summer, and the semifinals and final potentially of the Nations League as well. Yes, the U.S. is still second place behind Mexico. I think that just that quality that they have, the quality of elite talent at the top of the squad, you could make a case that the U.S. has more elite talent right now at very, very top places in the entire world than Mexico does. You could make a case on that. I wouldn't necessarily agree, but you could make a case that they're number one. At the youth levels, though, clearly lacking behind, and they were the team. The U.S. team was the one that looked like a bunch of individuals out on the field, not a team, not a collective, not with an idea, not working together, not understanding playing together. That was one of the biggest on-field issues for that team. And we've not seen that with the senior team. Enough of these players have played together enough. They're going to have a ton of time together this summer to build those relationships, which are already strong. So fingers crossed. I remain pretty hopeful about November and December and January maybe of 2022 and 2023.
There you go. A positive note to finish on. And we must say, as our Jason Christ and the players he had, a lot of them didn't have a preseason coming into this camp. A lot of them hadn't played together. As we said, a lot of the better players weren't called up. So there was a lot of adversity to the young US group to go through. It didn't come through. It didn't qualify for the Olympics. And that no doubt will have some kind of impact on the US men's national team in the years to come. Let's see how big of an impact that is. So head over to Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com. The latest news, reaction, and analysis. All things US soccer with the men's team, women's team, and for the Olympics this summer, we'll have you covered.